Dr. Neal is Associate Professor of Art, Business, and Arts Management and the founding director of the Center for Business and Management of the Arts at Claremont Graduate University in California. He was the founding director of Sotheby's Institute of Art in Los Angeles. He's the editor of Held Essays on Visual Art for the Brooklyn Rail and was the executive editor at the Drawing Center in New York City. He has served as both associate editor and contributing editor for Art Review magazine, and his writing can also be found in Modern Painters, the Art Newspaper, Icon, Hyperallergic, and much more. In 2005, he co-founded Boyd Level LLC, a private curatorial firm and consultancy that specializes in contemporary art. Also with us is Jeremiah Ojo, an artist, cultural entrepreneur, and community advocate. Jeremiah is the founder of Creative Milieu, a creative professional development enterprise where he trains and connects creatives through an integrated online learning and staffing agency for the creative economy. He is also the founder of lèkùn, an art business advisory firm that facilitates and cultivates opportunities for visual artists of African descent to create, sustain, and thrive. Jeremiah has served on the boards of numerous arts organizations, and he is currently on the advisory board of the Black Art Futures Fund. A core pillar of AFF is that we must develop new models for arts funding, as we've been discussing. So we reached out to Jonathan as he's engaged in pioneering thinking on how the art world must be better capitalized, and specifically about mapping social enterprise funding structures to the arts. And Jeremiah is a former student of Jonathan's at the Claremont graduate program, and he's on the ground applying these ideas through his practice. So I'm really excited to dig into this with both of you gentlemen today. Jeremiah and Jonathan, welcome to the Arts Funders Forum.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
So Jonathan, we're gonna start with you. You are at Claremont working with students who I keep calling our next generation of cultural workers. Those who are coming up along with the generation of funders with very different views about how we fund and practice the arts in the country. And you're developing new frameworks for the sector with them. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about these frameworks that you've developed, your thinking on our need to develop new models, and how practitioners like Jeremiah can create more possibilities on the ground for better capitalization. So what have you seen? What are you thinking? And where do we need to go?
Thanks, Melissa. And I just want to say off the top, what a stellar set of presentations we've just heard from Kemi and Jaja and Sean and Kat. I mean, I can't believe that we get to be in this company, and I applaud everybody who's been here. It's really overstating it to say that we're coming up with new models. I think that what we've been doing is just taking some back to basics ideas about new venture creation and entrepreneurship and really trying to bake them into the core curriculum and the basis for arts administration and art business curriculum. And if I'd say where we're going to go with that, all you have to do is follow people like Jeremiah who've come through our programs. I wish I could take any ounce of credit, but Jeremiah is an unbelievably talented fellow and is poised to do amazing things with the work that he's doing with lèkùn and previously with Creative Milieu. From my standpoint, we need to build a culture of creative entrepreneurship in the art and cultural field. So much of the art and cultural sector is pretty conservative with regard to its institutions and with regard to its thinking and with regard to the way it thinks about gaining funding. And it's just time for us to begin to upend that thinking and realize that we can look to the artists, and I applaud Sean with the creative leadership that artists can provide to these organizations. But we put so much pressure on artists to be the creative thinkers in the room. And we put so much pressure on artists to be the visionaries. And there's an immense amount of talent in these organizations at all levels, from the guards in the museums to the curators to the program directors to the educators. And we need to create an atmosphere where those individuals are given the tools and the space, and importantly, the resources to think about new ventures, new initiatives, new opportunities, both within their organizations, outside of their organizations, in their communities, at small scale as well as at scale. And that's what we've been trying to do. I think we haven't even scratched the surface yet.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to digging in here a little bit with you guys on what those particular models are that are going to help our artists and our institution to think in this way and get funded for it. So Jeremiah, you are in Brooklyn. You're working with artists to position themselves as entrepreneurs and to help align around the thinking that artists can solve our most urgent challenges and that they should be funded for doing that and funded in that particular way. So can you tell us a little bit about how your practice works in this way and who are the types of artists that you're working with?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks again for this opportunity to share, and great to be in conversation with a friend, mentor, former professor, Jonathan. As you mentioned in my intro, the work I do is very systematic in the sense that create, sustain, and thrive is kind of the career roadmap that I use to position artists to think about themselves as art entrepreneurs, right? One of the great benefits of going to the grad program at Claremont was kind of formulating my systems thinking and applying that to how I can empower artists to think the same way, that regardless of their creative discipline, whether it be painting, sculpting, performance, or other, they're able to take those skills and transfer them into the creative economy and apply them to a myriad of different social and cultural issues that often plague society as a whole. And one of the things that I particularly do in my work is coaching. Many different industries out there have professional development support, but oftentimes it's not just the structured business element, but it's also the emotional. You know, it's the multi-sensory, the sensual, the textured elements that help support artists in understanding that one, yes, you do have a transferable skill, but two, how do you make it sustainable and scalable, right? And not just in the studio, but also in the gallery, in the museum, but also in your community, most importantly. So getting them to first begin and understanding kind of what we call our discovery consultation to define what their end game is. So understanding your talent and that transferable skill and saying, all right, beyond painting this painting or sculpting, you know, this piece of wood, how do you take how do you investigate, how do you excavate the ideas that you have been working and researching on, and think about how you can affect change in your community, not just for yourself, but even, you know, from a global standpoint, because oftentimes artists are looking at things, again, from a systematic standpoint, and they're watching patterns continually. So it's been a great joy, specifically working with communities of African descent, particularly myself being Nigerian American, and I'm very proud of that. Dwelling in that liminal space oftentimes pushes us to think as we code switch. So we think and understand our world very differently. And I think many artists, particularly many who are rising kind of in a social standing and awareness now, who've always been making but are often getting more attention now, are in that liminal space. So we look to work with them hands-on and help them create, sustain, and thrive.
It's incredible work. And I'm curious how, when you're going through this process and engaging in this practice with the artists you work with, at what point in this process do you start to talk about and brainstorm through how they can think about the funding of their work and the business models of their work in a different way versus the traditional systems that we're presented with and we know about kind of growing up in the arts?
Yes, that I'll open that up, and then Jeremiah, why don't you take it away? I think one of the things that you constantly hear from in this the traditional model is that collectors are out there and they are purchasing work, they are building collections, and thereby supporting artists. I think it's so important to begin to upend just that set of conventions and begin to think about collectors and other funders, rather than just purchasing work to support artists, to begin to have those conversations with people like Jeremiah and those artists to ask, what are the larger projects? What are the larger systems and the larger institutions or initiatives that you see your practice as part of? And how can I support that, right? Don't make the work a token of investment that then one hopes will accrue in value based on the reputation of the artist. Invest in the artist's projects, invest in the institutional infrastructure. You have incredible examples of that with people like Titus Kaphar and Next Haven up in New Haven, Connecticut. You've got a number of other people who I think are replicating that model around. And so collectors need to stop in some sense, not stop, but in addition to building collections, I think they need to begin funding projects and begin thinking about how do they become equity partners, funders, impact investors and philanthropists for an entire range of street level and ground level initiatives that one day have the potential to grow into the great new institutions and the great new ecosystem, that the word that Sean used earlier, which I really believe in.
That's exactly right. And I guess to drill in a little bit deeper is also thinking about, building those relationships. Sean made reference to building specific relationships with artists and aligning yourself with their mission, right? And what their end game is. Because oftentimes the thing that draws you to the art is nostalgia, it's common interest, it's curiosity, which we'll explore here in a moment. But I want to urge many funders, collectors, or the like, those with resources, not just financial capital, but intellectual capital, to transfer some of that wealth to the periphery. And when I say periphery, oftentimes many funding density models are on the coast here in the US, but look to middle America, where artists like Alexis McGrigg, an artist I've been working with for a number of years, lives in Jackson, Mississippi, and has opportunities to sell work and exhibit here in New York, and take those resources and look to their specific community and buy buildings or educate young people. Another great example is Genesis Tremaine, a new somewhat art market star who's been an educator here in Brooklyn for a number of years in the New York City Public School in math. And every time she has an exhibition with her gallery here in Bed-Stuy, she does art programming and buys thousands of dollars of art supplies, but also as a math teacher is looking and teaching math through art. So expanding beyond just the object and investing in the object, but investing in the person, their ideas, and their mission, I think is critically important. And one of the things that I do, particularly with lèkùn, is to push that level of urgency around not just sustaining, but thriving, right? Coasting up to that third level, or opening that third door, as we call it, of thriving, where you're able to kind of turn back and say, hey, I now have more resources. How can I redistribute wealth really in all different forms to my community or other communities where I've seen similar obstacles?
And that means every one of those people has to be ready with a plan for when someone comes knocking on the door with funds, right? When someone wants to be involved, you have to be ready with a pitch deck, a business plan, a budget, an understanding about what the market looks like, who your audience, who your clients, customers, who your community is actually going to be, how you're going to serve them, and how you're going to do it differently. All of these things are not mysterious, but we in the art world for so long have kept this at bay, at arm's length for whatever reason. And I think now is the time for artists and art workers of all stripes and the leaders to be ready for a new generation of funders who want to see how they can make an impact, and they want to see what their dollar is going to do, not just in terms of what it is that they might be able to put inside of their house or build into their collection, but what it is that is going to have a long-term impact on communities, on people's lives.
I love it. And what you've just both articulated so well is something we really believe at AFF, which is that funders need to think of themselves as investors and rethink how they engage and fund creatives, and that artists and creatives have to think of themselves as entrepreneurs. So just to close out, a quick last rapid fire question for each of you. Given that, Jonathan, you're in California. We talked with Jaja about engaging the tech sector. How can we get them to fund these artists and creatives, and what models do we need? Impact investing, social enterprise. What's the key story we need to tell in order to push that forward?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think that what Jaja began with in terms of a shared language and needing translators and people who are conversant in the language of art and the language of tech is one step. We have an art business and information systems and technology program that we built specifically for this reason. But I'd say the one thing that we need to do, in a way, goes back to something that Sean mentioned at the beginning. We need to question ourselves. It's not so much that we need go to tech and say, you need to understand us, you need to understand what art is about, you have to understand what these institutions are, we need to educate you. We need to educate ourselves about the values and the missions that drive people in tech. And a lot of that is about problem solving of various different kinds. And I think that the more that we in the art and cultural sector can position what our artists are doing, what our institutions are doing, what our workers are doing, and what we are about in terms of our mission and values, in terms of problems and challenges that need to be solved, we can have that conversation with those people in tech. And we need to educate ourselves about those individuals, about that sector, and be a lot more humble, because the jargon on this side can be hard to penetrate, and there's no reason to continue to condone that. We need to be a lot more humble and go to those people and say, what is your interest? What is your culture? What are you interested in being a part of? And I think that will very rapidly begin to break down the barriers. It's not going to be about what kind of painting do you want to hang in your new condo. It's going to be, what kind of initiatives do you want to get behind? And let me introduce you to some fantastic artists who are doing really interesting stuff. Yes, they do an interesting creative practice too, but listen, there's so much more that's available here.
Amen. Jeremiah, close us out with this concept of curiosity, which you said is the great connector between artists and tech and technology. Tell us more about that. Close us out with that.
I would even push that to say ferocious curiosity, because there's kind of a honey badger-like energy that artists and tech entrepreneurs have. Again, going back to this idea of systems thinking, they're looking at patterns, colors, textures, volume in society, societal behaviors, and looking to enlighten society about many of the ills that are going on and how to problem solve. Facebook fundamental mission, connected more people in the world than any other platform we've seen in history. So in thinking and using that same kind of somewhat conceptual framework, how do we look at the artist studio as a laboratory of curiosity? For many of the individuals who are collecting or patronizing organizations, they're curious about not just what is being done, but the impact. So how can we attune some of that same funding or risk that often happens in angel investing and take that to the artist studio and say, what's going on in this laboratory? There's an artist I work with, Alfred Conte, who forges literally atomized steel dust and acrylic into portraits, as a metaphor for the weathering African Americans face in their communities and even on their bodies. So how do we go to him in his studio and say, how do we tell this story wider, or what are some of the elements that we're seeing in the amalgamation of different media, and how can we support or enhance this to solve problems that are much broader than just the art world or selling a painting to put in your condo?
Jonathan, Jeremiah, will you come back and talk to us more about this, please, in the new year?
For sure.
Thank you both so much.
Jeremiah.
Thank you both so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Great to see a professor and alum together. Thank you for being here.